It's Father Jacob speaking to our summer religious education program, and we've answered a couple of the questions you've had already in some of our previous videos, and we're now going to be answering some questions you had about the Bible. This is one Bible. Bibles come in many different shapes, forms, variations, whatever it may be, and one question in particular that stood out was someone had asked who actually composed the Bible. So often when we see the Bible, we think of it as one book. And so we imagine that maybe it was just one author that composed this whole Bible. That's certainly not the case with the Bible. The Bible took thousands of years to be fully written, and it was written by many different authors throughout history. And so it took thousands of years for all of these books to be written, and eventually all of these books were put under one cover of the Bible. And what's unique about the Bible, because there are numerous different authors who composed the books of the Bible, is that each of those authors used the particular gifts and talents that they had. And when they used those gifts and talents to compose the sacred scripture, we believe that they were divinely inspired. They were divinely inspired so that everything they composed, everything they wrote in this Bible was free from error. So there was nothing that's contrary to faith or morals in the Bible. And so while there is an author who actually put pen to paper and used the unique gifts and talents that they had to compose that particular book of the Bible, what makes all of these books canonical, what makes all of them part of the Bible, is the fact that God divinely inspired them so that they did not write anything that was tainted with error, and everything they wrote would not conflict with faith or morals in any capacity. And so again, the Bible has numerous authors throughout history. What makes it so unique is that God divinely inspired those authors so they would not write anything that was contrary to faith or morals. And it was the church. The reason we have this whole collection of books under one cover of the Bible is because it was the church in history, the church in time, after the time of Jesus, that said which books were divinely inspired. There were some other texts that were composed at that time about the life of Jesus or the life of the church or even in the Old Testament, and it was the church that said these are the definitive texts that are divinely inspired by God. And so if we didn't have the church, we wouldn't even have this book, because it's the church that brought this whole collection of multiple books and put them into one book, which is the Bible. And so that's why we have such appreciation for the church, because it's the church inspired by the Spirit that said these authors were divinely inspired by God to not compose anything that was contrary to faith or morals. So again, a collection of many books composed by many authors over time that was eventually by the church brought under one cover in what we now have as the Bible. You can think of the Bible similar to a newspaper. You have a newspaper, you have all the front page articles that are important. Then you have the sports section, you may have the comics section, you may have any other sections that are in there. And every time you read the newspaper, you approach each section a little differently. You're not going to read the front page like you're going to read the sports section. They're a little different from one another. So too in the Bible, we have many different literary forms that are used. So we have history, we have theology, we have philosophy, we have allegory, we have hymns, we have all sorts of these different characteristics of literary forms in the Bible. And so when we read the Bible, just like the newspaper, we have to see what type of book we're reading. And even in a particular book, there could be many different forms, so we have to see what is this particular, maybe chapter, verse, whatever it is, of that particular section of the Bible trying to say to us. Again, so it's a vast array of books composed over time, brought together under one common cover because God divinely inspired those authors, and that's what makes them part of the Bible. There were some questions that were asked about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Now, in creation, it's important to be aware that God obviously created everything that we have on earth. There was a time when this earth did not exist. There was only God, and it was God who brought forth the world from nothing. So there was a time when there was nothing except God. Only God existed, and then God decided, out of an overabundance of his love, to share his life with creation by creating the world. And when he created the world, the crowning achievement of creation, the most important part of creation, as God tells us in Genesis, is the creation of Adam and Eve. And when that happened, when Adam and Eve were first created, they were in complete harmony with God, they were in complete harmony with one another, and they were in complete harmony with all of the created world. There was no sin, there was no suffering, there was no death. All these things that seem so painful to us now, when God first created the world, those things were not part of creation. It was only because Adam and Eve freely chose to sin that sin, suffering, and death entered into the world. Had they not sinned, we wouldn't have had those issues. And so it's because God gave them that command, which was a test, just like he tested the angels. Everyone who's created by God gets tested by God. And so Adam and Eve, just like the angels, were created. And when they were created, they were given a test. And the test was they couldn't eat of that particular tree that was in the Garden of Eden. They could eat of all the other trees, but they couldn't eat of that one tree. And so we had a question about, well, why would Eve and then eventually Adam, and why would they actually believe the serpent? And the reason they do, and we believe the serpent is obviously a symbol of Satan, the reason they believe the serpent is because what the serpent does, what Satan always does, is he takes some good and then he twists it. He turns it around so that it no longer is good for us. Satan says to them, don't worry, if you eat of this tree, if you eat the fruit of this tree, you're not going to die, you're going to have knowledge of good and evil. And so Satan is taking this knowledge, which is something that's good, and he's then transforming it into something that's not good. And that's always what Satan does. He always takes something that is actually something good and then tries to disorder it so that it no longer is good for us. So sin is really just an absence of good. Anytime we sin, we're going in the direction of something that's good, but because of how we use it, it no longer is good for us. We basically disorder what God has created as good, and we disorder it into something that's bad for us. That's why I say gluttony is a sin. If you overeat, right? Eating is something you have to do. Eating something that is healthy for us, something we have to do. And even if you overeat, basically you're taking something that's good, nourishment that comes from food, and you're then turning it into something that's not good, where it's basically just serving to give you pleasure and not serving as nourishment for your body. And we can think of any sin in analogous terms like that. So again, just some questions on the Bible. The Bible is written over thousands of years by many different authors. What makes the Bible composed under one book is the fact that all of those authors were divinely inspired by God not to write anything contrary to faith and morals. Adam and Eve, when they were in the Garden of Eden, they were originally created in such a way where they were in complete harmony with God, they were in complete harmony with one another, and they were in complete harmony with all the created world. There was no sin, there was no suffering, there was no death. There was only the original harmony that God had in store. Adam and Eve freely chose to disrupt that harmony by partaking of that which they should not have partaken of. And anytime we sin, we're always going after something that is supposed to be good, but we're using it in such a way that it no longer is good for us. So those are just some questions you had on the Bible. I hope this helps. And we continue to pray for you. Keep learning. We're now getting into the next section of our religious education program. And so we continue to pray for you. Make sure you're learning, not just during your program, although that's very important, but even after your program's finished. Some of you have already finished your summer program. Our faith is something that's with us all the time, not just when we're in class, not just when we're in a summer program. Our faith is something that's with us each and every hour of each and every day. Thanks for watching. God bless.